Yeah, well, I mean, so having my career split in estimating and project management as well, when we were in estimating, I mean, I was frequently bidding several $100 million jobs at any given time, and we had to put together cash flow charts, and we needed to understand how much we needed to mobilize, right? You don't really get your mobilization money or your first couple of checks until a couple months into the job. So you need to understand how much money you need that for that project to get going. How much your first couple, you have to guess how much your first couple of payments are going to be. And then you got to understand when you're actually going to start cash flowing. For a couple $100 million job, you're not really cash flowing until 6, 7 months into the project. So now you need X amount of dollars to get going, and you need to put the cost of borrowing into your bids. Now, there's probably people screaming right now, yeah, I'm just going to keep throwing money into my bids and I'm never going to get a job. But these are real costs, and you need to have real costs into your bid. Especially if you're growing and you're going after larger work, you most definitely don't have that money to mobilize and get those projects going. Even if you're a small trades contractor, you still need money to mobilize and get going. The public works sector, I think is a little bit better and is more structured when it comes to payments. The private sector, I hear stories of many, many months. I mean, I have a client right now who he's going after the GC. Well, not going after, but he's asking the GC for escalation money because the owner is pushing the jobs beyond the schedule and nobody wants to give him the money. Well, he's suffering on cash flow and he's got a 10% retention that he still hasn't gotten. And which is messing up his cash flow for the next couple of jobs. I got another potential client who's telling me that they have about they're a $10 million a year company. They got about $5 million of work that was supposed to start 3 months ago, and it's completely destroying the cash flow within the company. So that's why, it's really important to understand the cash flow, exactly what you need. And borrowing money is not always bad debt. It's good debt to get you going, but there's ways to understand it and to put that because borrowing money costs a lot of money, right? Borrowing money costs a lot of money. It's 15, 20, 30%, whatever it may be, depending on the source that you're borrowing money. But it's important to understand to bake that money into your bids, and there's ways to do that. It's not that easy, but there's ways to do that. You got anything you want to add on that before we move to the next?
No, a lot of all of that spot on, right? And one thing I will say, to your last point, the cost of capital, regardless of where you get it from, your own cash, because there's a cost to your dollar, right?
Yeah.
The cost of capital, whether it's your own cash, a line of credit, credit cards, alternative financing, the cost of capital reactively and unplanned for is always going to be more expensive than a proactive approach to managing your capital stack. And that goes back to a lot of the things that you just said, right? How do I build my schedule of values? How do I negotiate my payment terms? Can I get reduced retainage on my materials? Can I bill for my retainage at 50% completion? There are so many different levers that you can pull as a business owner, particularly on the subcontractor side, that are not universally utilized. They're not universally done. They're not even considered in some cases, right? But the the margins are so thin on the subcontractor side and even in the GC side in a lot of cases. The margins are so thin. The amount of on-hand working capital, you're not getting calls from Wells Fargo and Chase saying, please take my money. So that 3 to 6 weeks of cash on hand, I've got a 12-month backlog of jobs. My busiest times is in the summer, so I've got some big jobs in the summer. One was supposed to start in June, one's going to start in July, one's going to start in August. That's ideal. Great job on the estimating and budgeting team on the front end, building out the backlog. And I've got a couple supplemental jobs that I know I'm going to fill in some gaps in the fall. We are golden. Well, those first two projects both get delayed, and now all three start in August. And they're delayed for things outside of your control, schedule before you, other issues on the job. Now that cash flow that you forecasted and that manpower resources that you forecasted and every other operational aspect of the business is now going to be 3x potentially in that month.
That's a good point.
of
No.
what you were, of what you were originally planning for. And then what makes that worse? Well, now I've got a huge gap. I got a 2-month gap that I need to now go find a job and bring that in so I can keep my resources busy, or I can fill that gap. And does it mean I have to go buy a job? Does that mean I have to go undercut somebody and get it last minute? Does that mean it's not the type of work that I typically do? So there could be other
Right.
margin erosion on the job because I'm not an expert in that, type of work potentially. And so it can quickly spiral to where you had this perfect plan, and because you don't have 6 months of operating capital just sitting on the sideline or in a short-term money market, or available to you liquid, those mistakes can be, and sometimes they're not even mistakes, but those when those situations arise, they can be detrimental to the business, right? You don't often go out into any other industry outside of construction and see 30, 40-year businesses go bankrupt on 2 to 3 months notice. You see that in construction, right? And that it just shows the risk and the balancing act that subcontractors and general contractors go through in some regards. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned the word risk, which is huge in construction, right? But you did make a really good point, because again, I had another conversation. It was just yesterday with a contractor who says, "I'm probably going to be starting three, maybe even a fourth project, all in within this fall coming up." And they were nervous. They're like, I can't cash flow all of that, and I can help them with my company. I can help them optimize their productions and get the most out of their projects. But that's where you come in, right? And that's where you help them out. So
when Gary,
it's a common problem. I'm sorry,
when
go
you
ahead.
asked when you asked them how they were gonna do that, what'd they say?
They were scratching their head a little bit. We didn't really dive too far into that topic, but it was kind of just a random thought that came out in the middle of another type of conversation we were having. But
Yeah.
it is a concern. It's a concern, because unless you're a major contractor, and even major contractors borrow money all the time, right? I know you have a major client who's one of your clients, and they're probably one of the I don't want to mention any names, but they're probably one of the largest contractors in the entire world, right? And they
Yeah.
borrow money. So you've got to understand how to leverage that and look at it as good debt, and be able to bake that cost of borrowing into your bids. If you know,
And that
and
the baking the cost into the bid is just one piece of it, right? And I get that comment all the time from folks that I speak to. They're like, "Oh, well, I could just do that for more profit, or I could put any cost into my bid." Like that's
well, of
like,
course.
well, when it comes to capital, um, you know, putting anything as a cost into your bid is going to do one of two things. It's just going to be bottom line margin erosion, right? You're making less profit or potentially not winning a job, or it needs to be coupled or paired up with the value that you drive as a company. And so things switch from a margin erosion or cost to proactive return on investment or return on practice, return on process, when you do a business practice and then you go achieve something with it. So we do at Build, we do an annual subcontractor market report, and we survey over 900 subs across the country every year. And the 2024 one just came out last month, I believe. And one of the questions we asked this year, or a few of the questions we asked were, including the cost of capital into your budgeting and bidding and estimating. And of the clients that reported that they did some type of practice around that, and I'm going to blank on the percentage, but the percentage that reported higher net margin gains or net profit gains on projects throughout the year or annually was well above 60%. So what that tells you is it's not about it's not about adding an extra point into your bid so that you can cover the cost of capital. It's those folks that do that, that's one piece of a very large pie. They are doing other practices and processes in their business that are meant to have a return back to them. And so that those higher profit margins are not because they included the cost of financing. It means they're using financing and other processes to achieve something, to streamline a different process, or to be more to have a better competitive advantage in their market, right? They're doing all these things together. So when you isolate a cost, a new vehicle, a financing, a new piece of equipment, whatever, when you isolate it and you don't broadly put it across teams and departments in the business to what the ROI is back and where you're getting it or how you're leveraging it, then everything can be viewed as just a single line item cost. You know?